I will say this. I'm very fortunate to, still have a job. Obviously, times are getting tough. Not sports related, but Microsoft, Google, Amazon. I think that like all cumulatively they've had I think 30,000 layoffs as a whole. Pretty ridiculous.
Hmm.
And sticking it to sports, we saw Vox owned SB Nation had mass array of layoffs too. We saw Bell last year with layoffs around this time, and man, as times are getting tougher, sucks to hear for our brethren out there, right? And it's it's a little bit unfortunate and unsettling given the situation because you know the job market's already so hard in this industry. That's why we started this, right? We wanted to have our own thing going, and to see that this happening to the bigger company like the big dogs, what does it make you think, Dave?
Well, here's the thing. Like, nobody's untouchable, right? So, like, I remember last year, I'm pretty sure one of the biggest eye-opening like layoffs I saw last year was from TSN. They had probably like most Canadian kids grew up watching Jay and Dan, like Jay Onrait and Dan O'Toole, and then they let go of Dan O'Toole. So now it's just been Jay Onrait doing his, or if it wasn't last year, it was the year before. It was in that pandemic period, and that just like they brought those two back to reclaim their former magic because like undoubtedly like they had some unbelievable chemistry going on with each other for years before they moved to the States. uh I didn't think that I guess that it was a business decision at the end of the day. Like I don't have numbers in front of me here, but to let go of a guy like, Dan O'Toole, who was like a part of the TSN brand for dozens of years. I know even going on that point with TSN, they were laying off people like that were there for almost 30 years. It was like guys that were on the radio for 30 years. It just that's the way that the industry's shifting. A lot of the jobs that were around 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, are already starting to fade, and we're starting to go into the digital market. But unfortunately, as we saw, the digital market as well isn't as safe and secure as many people probably thought it was, and we're losing a lot of good content and stuff like SB Nation. So in particular, the pension plan puppets, that would be the Leafs affiliate blog site. They've come out. If I'm not mistaken, they were the ones that came up with the um, would a
Potato thing.
potato would a
Yeah,
potato do better than was it Dave Nonis?
yeah, and I do want to clarify. Um, they are still around. Like I know we're talking about these cuts by SB
Yeah,
Nation. They are one of the ones that survived the cut. I think it was six
did they?
NHL markets that survived. Yes, yes,
Oh,
yeah.
I heard
So I
because
think
what I heard was all the Canadian markets got their funding cut.
let
Or
I'll
maybe
go
I'm
ahead and
wrong.
take a look too. From what I saw, I think it's they're keeping like six markets.
I
It's
wouldn't be
like
surprised if
Boston,
it's just original
Montreal,
six.
Toronto.
Yeah.
It might
See,
be. It might
See
be.
that would make more sense than not keeping any of the Canadian markets because it just comes off like I get it if you wanna maybe it's not as profitable in places like Columbus or Arizona and 100% there's definitely arguments towards that, but like to cut the funding from the Toronto based and the Montreal based, even I'll be even honest with you, like I saw like the Philadelphia one has a big support. Um
It's
the
crazy.
Rangers, obviously has big support as well. Like you cut funding from teams like that, like it's so baffling. But at the end of the day, the economy as a whole right now, guys,
Not
isn't
too
that
hot.
great.
Yeah.
I'm not like listen. I won't be the first. I'll sit back and I'll say like I'm not the one to talk about like economics and stuff. Brian definitely knows a lot more than me. He's got the into it of for the economics and stuff probably. I don't know if like yes
Yeah,
or
I'm a
no on
nerd.
that one, Brian.
I'm
Yeah,
a nerd.
so
Yeah.
there you go. Yeah, so I won't. But listen, it's agreed upon. Like, all the analysts are saying, we're in a recession right now. The economy's not doing so well. We're trying to get out of that, post-pandemic, slide. The
It's just crazy
other
because this
other
industry,
events around the world haven't helped either.
this industry as a whole is just so hard to make it in, right? And when you do
Yeah.
get the
Yeah.
opportunity, it must be devastating. There's a new hire that probably got axed somewhere over there, and man. But the main thing is like good content prevails, passion prevails. If you want, you can
Hmm.
keep at it, and at the end of the day, like eye on the prize, and things will get better. Hopefully, a couple years from
Let's
now,
yeah, like let's be clear. That makes it
we're
seem
not
like I'm
going
going
anywhere.
against the grain here. No, yeah. Okay, so two things. Just from looking at pension plan puppets, I actually do think it might have been an NHL wide thing. They've got an article that kind of outlines an uncertain future past February. And if that is the case that we're losing them to, just leave specific. There's very good content creators that either were there or are there right now. Like a lot of names I recognize and podcasts I listen to, like Heart of Lad, Katya Knapp. I think Acting the Flumen probably was there at one point. I don't think he still is, but
Such a
he's a guy.
great follow. That is
Yes,
one of the best
exactly.
Twitter follows I've ever made. He's so
Yes.
funny.
Him and Arvin's they had their podcast. I used to listen to that one a lot. So leave specific. That sucks if we're losing those guys, but I'm very confident that we're not losing those guys from the whole industry.
Hmm.
We're just losing them from where they started out. Right? They're gonna have to figure out where they're gonna go from there. But we talked about passion and talents. Those guys have it. They'll find a spot, no problem. We talked about TSN layoffs. There was Sportsnet layoffs too. Like um,
Hmm.
Bob McCowan, he kind of just like it was kind of just like a disappearance. He was just like, oh yeah, so I'm done. Bye. That's kind of what happened there. Hockey related, like guys, older guys, Doug McLean, John Shannon, Kiprios for a time. Basically, that whole Hockey Central panel has kind of been recycled. And specific to the TSN, going back to like last year, it was either last year or 2 years, like you said, it was around this time. And what comes up around this time too is Let's Talk, right? And the hypocrisy around that.
Yeah.
So it's just something to keep in mind. With we talked about the SB Nation layoffs or whatever too. Like some of these conglomerates, like it's a little out of
If
touch, right?
if
With the
I'm not
context of what's going on.
if I'm not mistaken, I believe one of the stories last year or the year before, I can't remember
Yeah, they
exactly. Don't
blend,
quote me on
man.
this, but it was that a lot of people were given their walking orders on the Bell Let's Talk day, which is if it wasn't on the day itself, it was like within the 24 hours, which is kind of like,
Yeah,
you know,
so
as we're gonna
hypocritical.
talk about after with a certain coach being axed as well,
It's a
you
very
know
good
how,
analogy.
how we're like, how hypocritical can you be? Like how short-sighted
The, th-
Tone
can
deaf,
some
man.
companies be? It's so tone deaf
the thing
when
is,
you're doing stuff like that.
like, we see this a lot in other industries. Microsoft, they have a huge M&A going on with Activision. I think it's a $70 billion bill or something like $70 billion deal or something
Yeah,
like that. But 10,000 layoffs. They also invested
Yeah.
$10 billion into ChatGPT like that same week. It happens. At the end of the day, like Dave said, everybody can potentially get axed, but usually the people that are last to get axed are the ones at the top making those decisions, right? Which is really,
that's
really
a good point.
interesting given the situation with everything going on in this world right now. Because let's be honest, guys at the top are the ones that usually eating the best meals at the end, like at dinner, right? But
Yep. 100%.
we're not going anywhere. The main thing is that we're gonna keep doing our thing. We found a way to keep our
We're
costs.
here.
Nobody's
Yeah,
cutting us. We're the bosses.
we found a way
We
to
here.
we found a way to keep our costs low, and we're locked in for 2 years. So like it or not, we're here for 2 more years, boys. That
Talking about eating good. I've been eating so good. Good, bro. Oh, all the time.
and anyway, do you guys think that like the hockey layoff specifically from SB Nation, has anything to do with the NHL itself fundamentally not marketing itself well, because there was a quote from Vander Kane that went something along the lines of like, the stars that the NHL promotes are bland, and you don't you don't say, right? But in regards to that
Well,
quote
where is he
specifically,
wrong? Where's the lie in that?
that's an interesting take,
There isn't
Dave.
a lie.
There
Yeah,
isn't a lot,
there you
yeah.
go.
There isn't. Dude,
No.
the best hockey player in the world right now is Connor McDavid, and that
Yeah.
guy doesn't say a thing. The biggest, like, I remember, like, Evander Kane, he was always known as somebody who was a bit flashy. And like on his Instagram, he would post pictures of him with like
With the
racks
yeah,
racks
yeah,
of cash. Like, what was it? He was doing like push-ups on his back, and
yeah.
that was news in the NHL for months on end, saying like, should this be in the game? Should this? Or you could go to the Carolina Hurricanes with their bunch of jerk celebration. Any way to
Oh,
get the fans engaged, and we
yeah.
had civil war in the streets with one side of the hockey community saying, "Oh, it's not good. It's bush league." Well, listen, it's not for everybody. I get it 100%, but they're engaging their crowd. Like, isn't that what we're trying to strive here for? Carolina's not a strong market to get people. Like, you've got
They're not a
you
traditional market, right?
exactly.
They
They're
won't,
not a traditional market.
unless they have like good like a structured organization
Yeah,
like they do right
the
now.
Leafs will never
Things don't
do
go well.
something. The
Yeah,
Leafs will
the
never do
Leafs could be
that.
the most dysfunctional franchise. They could have a liberal potato, forget as the GM, have the potato own the team, and fans
Yeah,
are still showing up to the game, right?
100%.
That is not every market. Yeah, McDavid is obviously the poster boy for bland star.
Yeah.
You think
So,
that's
Christian, just one last thing before.
Yes, go.
So what my point was with Evander Kane before I started. I
Yeah,
get sidetracked really quick. Was like that story was in newspapers in the headlines for weeks on weeks on weeks. You go to the NFL, that's a typical
yeah.
Friday night post on Instagram for most of these guys, right?
NBA.
You go to NBA, dude. In the NBA, these guys are coming in like $10,000 suits. Like, they had the whole shift from their dress attire when they walked in. Like, now everybody's free to express themselves, and of course,
Yeah,
the NHL's last to do that because the NBA did it first. The NHL did it. Sorry, the NFL did it first. The NBA did it next. I don't know about baseball, but then the NHL did it. A couple years after the fact as well. It's just like we're always last to everything. We don't put ourselves in a position to succeed. We just want to stay, sheltered and secluded.
nice
It's
and
like
cozy.
this is our own little thing. You guys could have your own little thing. We don't want to push out and venture more. Like, what's the
Yeah,
point then? Like, I
no,
thought we were trying to be a growing and thriving business. That's not how you grow and thrive, by being like, these are all my cookies. You guys have your own cookies over there. I like mine the way it is. Like,
But do you also
I
feel
don't know.
like
So
do you
counterintuitive.
also feel like sometimes because we're so structured, when we see that little bit of Zegras flair, we see that little bit of something like does it make something does it make it more special? Like, you know what I mean? Or another thing too, do you feel like the way that the NHL is the product of the way that players are brought into the system? Players these days, like if they are known to act up, their draft stock falls like crazy.
like what is the definition of acting up? I think like that's where we're kind of arguing that the definition needs to change, right?
Yeah.
Because
Mhm.
in the NBA and the NFL, that's not acting up,
Nope.
right? If Evander
Yeah.
Kane, all this stuff, if he did all that as an NBA or NFL player, it might not even be commented on. Forget about like blowing up as it does in the NHL. Um, who's the captain of the biggest market in the NHL? It's a hockey robot. It's John Tavares. He's got no personality outside of hockey. He eats celery and kale
He
and
has a
plays hockey.
kombucha tap in his house. Did you see that?
I've heard about it, but I've never actually watched that video. But like,
That's
Dude,
I
disgusting.
don't
like,
think I
are
can bring
you
myself to watch too many
are
like
you
non-hockey
kidding me?
videos. He goes,
That is just
so
gross,
Are you
bro.
kidding me, dude?
right? Yeah, no, that's nuts.
I
That's
get it.
nuts. Yeah.
I get it. Be on your health thing, bro. But like,
Yeah.
are you kidding me, dude?
We don't need a
Really?
full-fledged feature on it and everything. But Brian, you brought up Zegras, and he's an example of a change in the guard, so to say, in the NHL, where we could get it just a natural turnover to players who are more out there, like Evander Kane wants. Here's the quote. The exact quote was: "You look at many of the players the NHL tries to promote and uses as faces of the league. They're some of the quietest and reserved people. Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid, John Tavares, Jonathan Toews, yada yada yada."
You know?
But you cannot say the same for some of the young guys. Like even
Mhm.
Bedard is a guy who doesn't he seem like a guy who's got some huge personality that
He's being locked
like
up.
He's got a swagger on
yeah
him.
right yeah he's being cautious. We saw in his comments to the World Juniors, like, you see the gears turning in his head. He prepares his answers ahead of time. In the NHL, I think it'll be a totally different story. He could be a guy who speaks his mind a lot more than the other Connor, right? Even Austin Matthews, he's more on the flashy side. Like, he gives you a good hockey quote, but he's got tons of other interests outside of hockey, and just things that are definitely really marketable. So, is there a problem? Can the NHL themselves do a better job? 100%. They might luck out into their problem being less of a problem, because I think some of the younger guys coming up are going to they might do the work for the NHL. They might put themselves out there themselves without the NHL's help. That's
You
where I
know
kind of
who
stand.
else? You know who else had a problem like that, and they're starting to slowly turn a corner? The MLB. So I said
Yes, you're
before,
right.
I said before, like I was like thinking about like the MLB, but they tried so hard to push Mike Trout as the face of the league, which,
Yeah,
albeit for 5 to 6 years there, he was undoubtedly like that McDavid. It was Mike Trout and everybody else, right?
in so
But
many
now
stats.
now you've got guys, Vlad Guerrero Jr., Julio Rodriguez. Dude, that entire, if you look at the 1-9 Dominican Republic
I
team at this World Baseball Classic,
yeah
that
yeah
if like I'm Canadian, I might legitimately just cheer for them because that team looks stacked. They look fun. They
They're-
look like they're so outgoing and enjoyable.
oh
Spe-
yeah. They're
speaking,
thinking about putting Juan Soto in the 9 hole.
Like how ridiculous, dude. How
Yeah, Brian
ridiculous.
can relate to that. Brian can relate to Juan Soto.
I watched baseball like one season of my life, and my team
The
won.
season where the Nats, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
and it was also the season where I just stuck with him, even though they're at one point they're like last, right? And I remember that, like, you know how he has that little like shake, like he sticks his leg. I don't know, like I think they call it like the shuffle or something like that.
in
The
the
Yeah,
Soto
box,
shuffle.
like as
Yes,
he's
something like that. The
squaring
Soto
it up for
shuffle.
a ball.
yes, like he
Yeah,
shuffles his leg
yeah,
a little bit, and when like he's like the only player that does something in that motion or vigorously, right?
if we're
And
gonna call that personality, that's a little. I don't know. I feel like that's a little too
but
Well,
far.
listen,
I get
that's
what
a
you're
sport
but
saying.
that went from like if you stared at the ball, like you
Yeah,
stared at
you're
your
right.
home run
yeah,
for longer than 2 seconds, the next player on the team was getting beamed in the head.
Yeah,
So, like,
if you
if that's the
accidentally threw your
personality,
bat a little hard, then you get
but
mauled
yeah,
at first
if
base,
you
or you
put
might
your
get
bat
punched out.
over your left shoulder instead of like dropping it on the floor, that was in terms for a full out brawl, like everybody coming
Yeah,
out of the dugout to fight.
but
So,
my
I
point
guess
is.
if that's
My
if that's
point
what it
is,
is.
that same season we had a guy Anthony Rendon who didn't show much personality, but was almost like I'd even argue better than Soto that season, right? So, it's just interesting that you have a guy that shows personality, performs, but
yeah,
takes more star power and kind of acts in a way that makes him. He was the face of our franchise for a bit because Rendon left the next year, but he got slandered for showing that little bit of personality sometimes online, and it was just interesting that now, it's just interesting now hearing that baseball starting to turn an eye and change, and maybe that is what we need in hockey. But
yeah,
I
uh,
think it's sorry. I think to the last point here. I think we have the answer. It's like it's just gonna have to be like a growing acceptance. Like if you're gonna be a fan, like listen, if that's what it's gonna take for people to tune off, like you know what I mean, to show a little bit of character, I think then that's what you have to do. I think for every one person you lose by showing a little bit of character,
you can gain
I'll
10
put
more
that
new
in air
guys.
quotes because You
Yeah.
exactly. You're gonna get 10 more kids who are gonna be lifelong fans because of what they saw, Trevor Seagrass do, or name anybody who you could think in your head who's just that little bit flat, like has that little bit of flash, and then also is able to back it up as well.
So
So
the one last point I just wanted to make on this topic is when Christian said who's the captain of the biggest market in the league, you guys both thought John Tavares. I did not think John Tavares. It was Jacob Trouba that came to my head, right?
yeah, that's
But
another
hear me
one
out.
too.
But hear me out. That's
But no, yeah,
that's one guy that you know does have a bit of personality, especially on the ice. He makes it known that
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, maybe not for the best reasons all the time, but
but
But listen, bro, every league needs its villains, right?
yes, that,
Like, how many villains are there in the NBA? You can consider Kevin Durant a villain. Why do I, a casual NBA fan, know so much about Patrick Beverly? Because he's a shit disturber, right?
Mhm.
Like, you can market
Does
guys
anybody
in many different ways.
know about Michael Bunting, who might be like the league's
Yeah,
next big rat? Like even like a
yeah,
Brad Marchand. Like if you take a census out of any NBA fan, like do they know who a Brad Marchand is? Like you could probably
yes,
compare him to somebody like a Pat Beverly, who will just start jawing at you for
or
for the
Tom
way that you look,
or
like
Tom
for
Wilson,
whatever
right?
reason.
Or
he
Tom.
Or
might lick
Tom
you, bro.
Wilson, exactly. Yeah.
But
The
Um,
I just want to draw one more comparable to another
mhm.
sport that Dave and I are a big fan of soccer.
Yeah.
Diego Costa, Luis Suarez,
Yeah.
right? Like
Well, that sport itself, like if you look at the English league in particular, Bri, like look at it in the 90s when United were ruling
the drama,
the
the
roost. Like,
antics, right? Like they
well,
have
not even
players'
just that, but
personality.
it was so like it was a little bit more like there was personality like in terms of the players, but not like in terms of flash. Like if you think of like United in like the 90s, you think of like Roy Keane.
But
That
the
guy is
but the
the antithesis of like fun. But then you look at a team like Arsenal, who was their biggest rival, and then you got guys like Thierry Henry, who just made the sport enjoyable to watch. And it was like his antics, like stuff that he would say like in the press conferences after. Like people wanted to be Thierry Henry, right?
and
So
yeah, you're right. Maybe we can see some
100%.
kid growing up over in Anaheim wanting to be like Zegers in the future, and that would
Trevor
definitely be an
Zegras,
interesting
100%.
look.